next week. This is an unusual situation, something we really haven't seen in a long, long time. In fact, you have to go back before satellite imagery back into the 1950s, the last time we've had 2 active tropical storms in the Gulf. And as far as recorded history, we're not aware of 2 hurricanes ever being in the Gulf at the same time. And those are possibilities, both the fact that we could have 2 active storms in the Gulf and then also potentially 2 hurricanes. Now, if we look at the Atlantic right now, there are 3 things we're watching, but you know, right now we've got trouble enough with these 2, Tropical Depression 14 and Tropical Depression number 13. This one here is just a wave that's coming off of Africa, and it's got a long ways to go. It does have a 50% chance of development according to the latest from the National Hurricane Center, but these 2 here are likely to enter the Gulf of Mexico. So let's focus in on those 2 systems and taking a look at what's going on here with these tonight. The Tropical Depression number 13, it's a little elongated here. It's not really all that well organized right now. The National Hurricane Center's latest update says it's poorly organized. Kind of looks more like an open wave, really, to be honest with you. And this feature still is likely to become a tropical storm at some point during the day tomorrow. The conditions are somewhat favorable for development here as it heads towards this area here, which would be the northern Leeward Islands. We'll keep watching it. A lot of different scenarios are possible. And then, you know, Tropical Depression number 14, while it is still broad and it is still a tropical depression, it's actually better organized. And so we'll see which one forms first. That'll determine the naming of these 2 systems. Taking a look at the tracks, I put them both up. I think this is a really good graphic to illustrate what we're talking about with the 2 systems. Keep in mind, we're up here in the northern Gulf Coast, and looking at it, I've got this nailed down with both tracks and some timing here. And we're looking at, this is possibly a hurricane. This would be TD13. Hurricane Center says, even though it's less organized of the 2, maybe a hurricane by Monday approaching South Florida. And, you know, there's some factors here. I mean, will it graze Cuba and the Dominican Republic? Will that, you know, have a weakening effect? Or will it go more up through the Bahamas? Time will tell. What's interesting, though, is if you look at the angle here, it does appear to be going towards our area, and there are actually some parts of our area, including parts of the Panhandle, that are actually in the NHC cone here with what is likely going to become a tropical storm and ultimately a hurricane. And then I have it zoomed in on this feature here, which is Tropical Depression 14 right now. That's likely to become a tropical storm, go over the Yucatan, come back out in the Gulf, and head towards Texas or Louisiana. And, you know, if this thing takes the eastern side of the guidance envelope, we actually might see some pretty intense impacts from what is right now Tropical Depression 14. So as we look at it, the update here shows that we are tracking a possible 2 tropical systems in the Gulf of Mexico as we get into the forecast for early next week. Both systems, Monday and Tuesday, showing up in the Gulf. There we go. I got switched back to our weather computer source, and I'll take a little pointer tool here, so because I know if you're watching like on a smartphone, you really need to be able to zoom in and see. This is showing Monday and then Tuesday, and this one is showing South Florida Monday and then Tuesday. And based on that, it looks like the system in the Western Gulf might be a little ahead of the other system as far as the schedule on it and its arrival. Now, what happens if these 2 systems are near each other at the same time? Well, that kind of gets interesting and gets into some nerdy meteorological stuff. And you might Google it and see so you can learn more about it, but there's an effect called the Fujiwara Effect. And if you have 2 tropical systems, that, especially when they start to get within about 500 or 600 miles from each other, they'll begin to pivot around each other a little bit. There have been circumstances where a smaller or disorganized system gets absorbed by another system, but they don't typically come together to form a monster superstorm because, you know, you've got real complex circulation patterns within the mechanics of a tropical system, and it gets really disrupted if you try and insert one system into another. So that's not really on the board as far as possibilities, but the two systems may kind of pirouette or pivot around each other a little, and there may be some interaction between the two, and the motion may be disrupted a little just because we may have two systems going on at the same time. Now, if one system was to follow the other, the first system could begin to churn the waters up, and that might actually make for a less impactful second system. But keep in mind, this is the peak of the water temperatures in the Gulf, and if one comes up across the Florida Straits, it's going to have a clean path of warm water to feed off of, versus having another one going over the Yucatan and up into the western Gulf. But these are early tracks, and so we may see some changes with the forecast, certainly. All right, so the bottom line with this right now, we expect both to become tropical storms. Both could also ultimately become hurricanes. The long-range uncertainty is both the intensity and then also the placement of the systems, because when you're talking about a good week or so away, 5 days to 7 days, there's a lot of inaccuracies with the modeling and the track. So expect some changes, but if we were going to get an impact here, right now we're thinking Tuesday and Wednesday would be the most likely days. And there's some other things we've got to look at too with that, and that would be, will the systems slow down when they reach the northern Gulf Coast? That is always the worst when you have a tropical system that's just falling apart or stalling as it's coming in, and it just rains and rains and rains. So let's talk about steering flow a little bit here. And right now we've got this really robust ridge here. It's an extension of the Bermuda High. And so that's quickly steering these systems and guiding these systems on a very, very brisk west-northwest and westerly track. And so both systems are moving fast around this ridge. But also we have a mid to upper level trough going on here in the Gulf, and so that's a little downstream. And so what's going to happen is this ridge is going to keep steering TD13 pretty quickly, but the system TD14, which is currently in the Caribbean, it's going to get out on the edge of the ridge, and it's going to get in this area of weak steering currents, and it'll slow down. But both systems, as they begin to interact with the trough, are going to go more towards the north. And so what it's going to do, it's going to allow this system, the TD13 system, to catch up with TD14, and so we'll probably have them both in the Gulf at the same time if it goes like we're thinking. That's not what we're hoping, obviously, but it may end up being the reality of the situation, and so we may have two systems within a day or two of each other in the Gulf, or even in the Gulf at the same time. Now, the Gulf's big body of water, so we could have one in the western Gulf, one in the eastern Gulf, one in the southeast Gulf, one in the northwest Gulf, something like that, based on the forecast. So let's look at the statistics here on our tropical systems. Right now, tropical depression number 13 is currently located at 17 north, 55.5 west, winds at 35, poorly organized, pressure 1,009 millibars, west-northwest at 21. This is the official track from the National Hurricane Center, and it has the system as a tropical storm north of Puerto Rico and then the Dominican Republic. As we get into Saturday night, by Sunday, it should be somewhere around these little islands right here, which are the Turks and Caicos Islands. Real pretty area. It's essentially the far southeastern Bahamas. And then we have it tracking north of Cuba. And it depends on the actual placement of the storm. One of the things I'm seeing here is if it's a little weaker than anticipated, it could be a little further to the south. And so that could continue to bring the track a little closer to the higher terrain of the greater Antilles. If that's the case, while the system might be more likely to impact us down the road, it may be more disrupted, especially if it spends some time over Cuba. Cuba's pretty mountainous, so that could be real beneficial to us as far as weakening it. But the official track brings the center of the cone over the Bahamas, which is terrible. You know, that's a real warm water environment, and very little relief in topography. And the same thing for South Florida. I mean, you know, we saw with Katrina, you don't want one to go over the Everglades. I mean, we actually saw one strengthen over South Florida, you know, so nothing to really disrupt the system there. All right, tropical depression 14 is moving west at 17, and based on the track here, it looks like it's going to go into Nicaragua and Honduras. It'll actually clip this part of the coast here, and that's a pretty low and non-mountainous part of Honduras. I've actually spent some time in Honduras. It's pretty hilly as you get into central Honduras, but the northeast Honduras is not going to have much of a limiting impact on that system because it's pretty low and flat. And so if it holds together across northeastern Honduras, which we expect, then it'll track up towards Cozumel and Cancun, skipping north of Belize. It'll go over the Yucatan, which is also not very high or mountainous, and then ending up in the central Gulf, and then South Central Gulf, and then eventually the Western Gulf or the Northern Gulf. And you know, if you look at the tracks, you probably say, well, that one in the Atlantic looks like it's kind of going right for us, and this one looks like it'll pass us to the west. But hey, we've seen a lot of systems pass us just to the west before. When they make landfall over Louisiana, we actually see some really impressive impacts here. So if this one were to say take the eastern side of the forecast track even, and there is a pretty good spread in the models on this one, you know, and go in around New Orleans, we could see some significant impacts here as a result. And it's showing that by Tuesday it could be ashore. So, you know, I mentioned on there that the timing is most likely Tuesday or Wednesday for impacts here, but we actually could see impacts as soon as Monday night if it was more of a situation where we saw a direct impact or strike from what is now TD14. All right, looking at the modeling, all right, there are some important things here. The models are really tightly clustered. So there's an excellent agreement in the models that this thing is going to track very close to the Turks and Caicos Islands and move out over the southern Bahamas and probably pass right over Andros Island. And it looks like it'll pass north of the Greater Antilles unless they've got the placement of the center wrong and it opens up a little into a wave overnight and then reforms tomorrow. The other thing to note is that the models begin to look more like spaghetti up here in the panhandle. And so what it's saying is the steering currents are relaxing some, and the system may actually slow down a lot. And there's more uncertainty too in the long range. So will this thing actually put on the brakes as it's coming ashore? We've seen that suggested by the GFS and the European with some of the runs that we've seen. And then this computer modeling suite for Tropical Depression 14 is actually more uncertainty. There's more of a spread here. I would discount the blue line there. That's not a likely scenario. These are stronger models here, and that's where the National Hurricane Center track is, but there are even some that suggest Louisiana or Mississippi. So Tropical Depression 14 also has an interesting road ahead of it, which still could have some bearing on our weather, and the strength of it will certainly weigh into how it impacts us, and the size of it will impact potentially the impacts that we might see as well. 2020, we've had 10 named storms earlier than any other time we've ever seen it. We're about to add 2 to the list the way it appears. Whichever one gets the tropical storm designation first gets the L name. That would be Laura. The next one will be Marco. So we could have a Laura or a Marco or both, which is the likely situation. If the one off of Africa forms, we could even have a Laura, Marco, Nana situation going out there. We're getting quickly through the list of names, and it seems almost inevitable that we're going to run through the list and make it through the entire list. This happened once before in 2005, and we actually ended up in the Greek alphabet. So if you go through the whole list of names and you used all the names on the list, then we go alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and so on as we go into the Greek alphabet. So that will be interesting to see if that happens. Hopefully it doesn't. A more active season just means it's more likely that we would ultimately get hit. You just get more storms out there, and it's not good. So this is another model, and I circled the circulations on this one. This is the European model, and what it does is a real good, long-range tropical forecasting tool, and it's been more reliable than the GFS has at times. And it's showing this is not a super well-defined tropical storm or depression on Saturday around Puerto Rico. This would be TD13, and then this would be TD14 possibly a tropical storm. It looks a little better defined. You can actually see a little swirl right through here. I'll pull it up full for you. And if you look at it, if you're looking like on a tablet or a desktop computer, you could probably see that that this system, that this particular model actually shows a more active tropical storm with this circulation, just because there's more of a closed low. This has more of a wave kind of look to it, but we're tracking it nonetheless. And this is the European again, and what it's done, actually the European has a much better defined tropical depression 14 and a less defined tropical depression 13. Now this is just one model, and the National Hurricane Center actually has the opposite solution in their official forecast. They're actually showing that 13 will be stronger than 14, but that's not what the European is saying in this particular run. And it has a Monday scenario where, you know, we're getting some moisture here from the upper trough that's in place across the region, and we've got an approaching tropical storm or hurricane in the western Gulf headed for Louisiana, and another one here in the eastern Gulf. And then, you know, to animate it further, this is Wednesday, and it's showing a pretty well-defined tropical storm with what is now 13, and it's really, you know, the imagery's kind of run my circle a little bit here, but it shows it somewhere south of Destin on Wednesday, and also note that we talked about Tuesday or Wednesday, and this is where the steering currents get weak, and so we could see a system that just kind of drifts in and causes us huge problems with rainfall. You know, tropical moisture is going to be very abundant with this much tropical activity going on. We've got another feature here that's kind of meandering over South Texas, and I can keep going. So this is the scenario for Thursday morning, and it has a tropical storm over really Clark County or Connecticut County, something like that. I mean, but the thing to note here is that the system is so slow moving that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we've got a low that's just drifting in according to the European model. And then we've got another band of rain going up the Red River Valley with what is now tropical depression 14, and we're still getting dumped on with rain. So that's another thing that I'm not liking with this, is that the steering flow looks to collapse, and that's going to bring in a greater uncertainty, more time for a potential system over the Gulf. And they're close enough to each other that there could be some interaction that may have subtle influences, or more than just subtle influences or impacts on the actual track of the systems. And, you know, I don't know how well computer modeling weighs into the equation of having two tropical systems kind of pirouetting around each other. So that certainly may have some bearing on what happens with the track on these two lows, which, you know, that appears to be the case, is that we're going to have two tropical lows going on at the same time. All right, so let's see what else we've got in our graphics. We're back to local radar here. So I've been through most of the stuff I have for tropics. I'll do a little digging to see if there's anything else I want to add in on Fox 10 News tonight at 9 and 10. And on Fox 10 News tonight at 9 and 10, we're going to have about 9:45 to about 10 o'clock right in through there. There's going to be an update from NHC, from the National Hurricane Center, on both systems with new tracks and new fans and new times and new intensities. And so it'll be really interesting to see what the meteorologists are going to have for us. So, and actually want to mention too, we got Biden's speech tonight at 9, so it may be right at the top of the 10 that we bring that new information to you on Fox News tonight at 10 o'clock. So we'll certainly have it for you as soon as we go on, but we're likely to also to have a speech from Joe Biden as he accepts the nomination from the Democratic Party to be the nominee for president tonight. So we'll be showing that on Fox 10 News as well. So that's it here from the Storm Tracker Center. I'll pop up a graphic here just to kind of show you what we're seeing one more time. I think a good one to show would be maybe this one right here that shows the two forecast bands. These are the official National Hurricane Center tracks with times. And again, you know, highly unusual situation that we may have one in the Gulf and one entering the Gulf about the same time. And according to this, technically we're going to have a hurricane and a tropical storm in the Gulf at the same time. But really, you know, based on what we saw in that European model, that we may have two hurricanes, or we may have one hurricane and the other one's just a tropical storm. It's just too far out to tell exactly how it's all going to break down and go. But the main thing is that if I were you, I would plan on next week, about Monday or Tuesday, that we may be doing some kind of preparations for a tropical system. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like right now because it's just too far out. But you know, even as soon as this weekend, you don't want to just tune out to social media and the news over the weekend. Try and make a point to check in with Fox 10 News morning and night. It's just that time of the year, and now that we've got two systems out there. And also be aware of misinformation on Facebook and social media. You may see somebody grabs one model run and they share a post that's old and dated. So make sure you're getting the latest information, and you can trust Fox 10 News for that. I'll see you on Fox 10 News at 10 p.m.